Hello everyone! Welcome in Puzzling Perspective, a podcast by Rzain Society. Today I'm interviewing Shelley Drogt. She's sharing her experience from customer relationship management that she had a chance to experience at Triple Dot, Zynga, but also some other places. She is the data-driven person that I know the best. She is really data oriented and focused on lifecycle marketing strategy and is sharing her best tips to make you scale profitably and retain your user. I hope you enjoy it. If you like it, please like and subscribe. It will really mean a lot and show that you support our podcast. Thank you and enjoy.
Used to work in customer service. Like I worked at call centers, then was like a booking agent for a glamping company. Didn't go to college or university for marketing at all. And one day I was like, I've had enough of doing like call center customer service work. And I knew that at the time there was a marketing role coming up with the glamping company to be a marketing exec for the UK, where it would basically cover everything from newsletters to PR and everything like that. To the website management and everything. That's kind of how I started in marketing. But within my trajectory into like CRM and Lifecycle, that really started when I moved to London 5 years ago, started in the iGaming experience as a CRM casino executive for the Belgian market at Betway Group. But after a good 2 years, I was like, gambling is not really my scene. And interestingly enough, I saw a role to be a lifecycle marketing specialist at Zynga for Star Wars. Initially, I was too hesitant to apply because as a woman, I kind of like put myself down a bit too much, where I'm like, oh, surely I wouldn't be good enough for the role. Funny enough, a couple of days later, got a message from the recruiter, like, would you be interested in applying for the role? Which I did. And I ended up getting it. And especially my time at Zynga, I was there for like over a good 2 years, have been able to work on amazing titles like Harry Potter Puzzles and Spells, Words with Friends, and then obviously Star Wars Hunters, but especially on like Harry Potter, but especially like Words with Friends, been able to really learn a lot more when it comes to like social gaming, really dive into the different kind of campaigns that you could look into, driving engagement and monetization, of course. And now been with Triple Dot since September last year, so it's been a good 8 months now, working on titles like Widoku, Triple Tale, Solitaire. So it's been an interesting journey as well, because I'm going from very expanding third-party CRM tools to being somewhat more limited. But I mean, that's in itself as well. It cannot always be an easy day in your job, obviously. So you need to kind of like see what you can do with the means necessary to you.
I love it. And to be honest, I think it's fascinating that you have all the scope, from like a growing studio to a big corporation like Zynga. So tell me, like, let's say I'm Zynga, I get a massive game like these Harry Potter games. I'm such a fan. Where did you start actually? Because it's such a big beast. Like, what can you do in CRM?
So essentially in CRM, obviously it's related as well if you work on an IP or not, because if it's like a studio only title, you're more free in the type of campaigns that you can do. So essentially where you would start is look at like the baseline of campaigns that you would essentially send out to make sure that any user, whatever bucket that they fall in under with like the segmentations, like within the CRM space, we call them buckets, because what you want to prevent is you don't want any leaking buckets. You don't want any users falling out of the buckets that don't get any communication. So you wouldn't necessarily start with like a baseline. You would then be looking more and more into if you've got like the data available to you, like player insights or anything like that, to see like, okay, what could we also do to be more educational for the players. So essentially with CRM, it's not always the case of what some people see it as, like we'll send out a notification, then yes or no they engage with it and it drives revenue. You need to focus on the long-term goals as well, not just that singular campaign, because the way that I've really gotten into it is I'm obsessed with data. So it's really looking into the baseline, being like, okay, you need to have an onboarding series, obviously, because sometimes within the game, it's not being explained well enough what is expected of the user. Or if you're like myself, you download a game, you tap through the tutorial. You don't care about the tutorial. You want to go through it, you want to play it. So then essentially you might miss out on a key part and things that would be educational to you. So then for that percentage that is opted into notifications, you can help with that education, setting those users up for the best success. And down the line, you will see that back in terms of retention and within your monetization, obviously. So it's really like that baseline. And on top of that, like you keep building campaigns where it's based on features or anything like that. But yeah, when you work on an IP like Harry Potter, where you have to deal with Warner Brothers, you also have to deal with brand guidelines, which can sometimes be a bit tricky when you think like, oh, I've got this amazing idea and this and that. And then you propose like the copy, and then it's like, yeah, we cannot like break the third wall or fourth wall, or we cannot do this or anything like that. It was more tricky on the Star Wars game because Lucasfilm and then having your own sandboxes, like I couldn't refer to Yoda or anything like that because it was like a different timeline. So that it's fun to work on a big IP, but it can also be tricky at times when you're like, oh, I've got this amazing idea, and it's like, yeah, but it just, there's just a little bit that doesn't fit within the brand guidelines, but it keeps you on your toes. And obviously, like you will always be met with like, not disappointments as in like big disappointments, but more like when you have an idea and you're like, oh, that would be insane, and then they're like, no, we can't do it. Obviously you have a moment like, oh, that sucks, but then you just move on to the next, because with Lifecycle and CRM, there's so much that can be done. And that's why with the data part, it's really interesting, because it's really looking at player behavior, where they tend to fall off and everything like that, like how you could optimize that with communications.
Well, that's a really good beast of information. I mean, I took some notes because I have a lot of follow-up question. Me, little noob user acquisition person, I think that all UA people, they will have, like to get more knowledgeable about life cycle management. I think it's becoming a must for everyone. What do you think? Like you mentioned data. I think it's a common passion that we have. So, what do you think are the key KPI that you have a look at? The one that you think are essential to know for any life cycle manager.
So key KPIs, like I mean, there's two sides to it. You've got the standard basic KPIs that you look at, which is your campaign metrics. Like obviously you need to know if your campaigns are essentially driving a value, if they are generating the clicks and everything like that, that you're receiving the sense. But that is like a very standard baseline industry thing that you should know, because if you don't, like, why you're even in CRM, because that's the basic 101 basically. But on top of that, and that is something that I've learned throughout the time, and especially here at Triple Dot, is go even more granular. And it's really looking at your retention, obviously, because just because you're getting the clicks on the notifications doesn't mean that the retention is working effectively. So it's really looking at your retention rates for different cohort dates. Essentially as well, what you could look at is like game starts or session lengths, because again, just because they click on a notification, if they close the app within 5 seconds after opening the notification, then it's not really, shouldn't really count towards as a session, because essentially they've not really done what you've wanted them to do. So it's really looking at those conversion rates. So it's really, retention is a main thing, as well as like game starts or sessions, depending like how you measure it as a company. Yes, obviously monetization part would be grand, but again, that depends on you as a business. Like if you are more of a business like a Triple Dot, our games are mainly like in-app advertising. So essentially like the more games you play, the more ads you watch, obviously contributes to revenue. But that aspect is more in like on the product itself that needs to be engaging enough. Whereas from a CRM standpoint, you kind of like the main point is like getting users into the game, but having a good user experience as well. Because essentially, if I would send you a notification or an email, like any type of messaging, external messaging, when I say like, oh, Claire, be fast because the race is starting for this and this feature. If you click on a CTA, you expect to, at least that's what I expect working in this industry, what the user flow would be like, is when I click on it, I expect to be deep linked to that area within the game. So if something says like, oh, don't forget your daily challenge, when you click on the CTA, you expect to be directed into the screen of the daily challenge. So when essentially an app has the user flow that it just opens to the main lobby of the app, that's not the best user experience. You need to make it as simple as possible for the user to immediately go into the right section, that all they have to do is press play and they go for it. So that is essentially like a key thing in itself as well.
Love it. And I think it makes sense. Like if you speak about the bonus, I'm going to be frustrated if I don't see any, right? Okay, so I love that you have different experience from big studio to new studio, but also new games. So how do you approach new games? How do you approach life cycle for new games? Like, is it something you add? In pre-production? Is it something you add usually production? What do you add? Do you add email, notification, and so on?
So it depends on the type of game and the structure, depending on the messaging. So like CRM lifecycle, essentially, you've got push notifications, you've got in-app messaging, and you've got email. So, for example, within Triple Dot as well, we don't really have games apart from Piper's Pit Cafe that I think we could definitely do email that would have that structure, because it's really with certain games, I think it depends on your audience as well, and having enough activities to actually have email. So first, to focus on email as well when you launch a new game, you need to have an idea what your calendar is going to be like. So if you're just going to launch a campaign or a game that is just completing levels, there's no form of live ops, there's not something new every week or anything like that, there's not an active live ops calendar, you're wasting your time with doing email, because your players won't want to receive 1 or 2 emails a week about the same thing that they have to play the game or anything like that. And essentially as well, what you could do in the beginning, you could have a onboarding series or a lapses series to essentially send some emails in the beginning, but you still need to have that appetite in between as well to keep your players engaged. Because if you also only send a massive bulk email once in a while, you're damaging your IP massively, because you're not regularly scheduling emails. There's no point for you to even do emails, because you won't be able to accurately and effectively be able to communicate with your audience. Because if you're doing emails, you need to send at least something once or twice a week, so that your IP has been warmed up, you have a good status, because otherwise it's just going to end up in spam, and you don't want that. Like your engagement just goes through the ground. It's not worth it. Whereas with push notifications, obviously any game definitely do push notifications, but also be effective about it. So the way that I would approach a new game as well is still thinking about what is going on within the game. So you would look at, like, again, your kind of like baseline campaigns, so like just generic notifications, whether it's like something about the characters in the game, something that seems engaging that a user would click on, because sometimes some of the most ridiculous, simplest copy works with people. Like I even tested something, this is not the new game then, but a couple of weeks ago, I tested something for one of our games, Solitaire, because it's got an older audience. You can play around with it a little bit, because sometimes you need to fit in within the tone of your game. I don't know if you've seen a Netflix show, Baby Reindeer, but essentially that is like everyone was talking about it, So sometimes, depending on the type of game you have, you can hop on the trends with your copy. So what I did was I did an A/B test between generic notification, generic copy, and then another one that had the title in the push notification that said, "Hello, baby reindeer, ... And then a body copy just said, "It's time for some solitaire, click to play now." And essentially the baby reindeer version had a higher conversion rate than the generic one. So, it's like looking at those kind of things as well within a new game. It's like establish like the tone of voice that you want to do. Because if we're talking about tone of voice, it's not gaming, well, it's some form of gaming that they have, but Duolingo is a main pioneer in what they do with their notifications. Like, they've really got their personas laid down. That's so well constructed. But yeah, it's really establishing like your tone of voice within your notifications that you want to do, but really start with like your baseline, your onboarding series, your lapses series, of course, and then on top of that, look at a live ops strategy as well. So in pre-production, you're necessarily looking at those main things. So baseline, welcome, lapser, live ops. So just like your standardized kind of campaigns that you should at least be doing. You can still be kind of like simple in your segmentation, whereas like obviously onboarding is for new players only, lapsers for lapsed players, and the other two, you could still send it to just everyone just to keep it going. However, once you've launched, that's kind of when you continue to track, you continue to optimize to see like what's working, what could essentially be killed. Like that's really when you keep building on top. So your like pre-production is mainly just to have like a baseline of campaigns to make sure it's working, because that's essentially your time as well to ensure that you've got everything sorted from a technical standpoint, whether it's like deep links are working, if you want to do incentivizations, like that is your main area to make sure that you can hit the ground running basically. And then once you've launched, that's the time where you just like look into optimizing what you already have, because that's when you essentially should be getting in those more users. You can optimize what you already have going on, and then essentially also build along as well. As you build out the app, you can look into what kind of campaigns could I even add on top of this that would drive that value for our players. And then you can also optimize your segmentations and so on, because essentially that's when you'll have more user data and more kind of like player personas to look into to drive campaigns for.
Well, I love how customer centric it is. Like I feel like you are like maybe one of the parts the closest to the customer. I mean, of course, that's customer relationship management, love or nothing. But speaking about the say and everything, I think it was things that will make me click. I think it's brilliant, the idea that you had. So we touch a bit about it, but how do you select the in-game features that you use in push notification, for instance? Because there is sometimes so many, or sometimes there is nothing at all. Would you always send a push, or what would you do?
So it really depends. Like essentially, when you first have a new feature that you're introducing, so this is something that at Zynga that we used to do as well. I'm sure that they still do it, but I'm talking about when I used to work there. A main thing that we would always do with a new feature, we would call it like a bull beat when we would introduce something new. And we would always first do like a teaser, and then as it would be launched, we would do like for all segments, so like all users, because essentially it's important to know for new users what is, or for existing users as well, like users that are mainly active. Obviously they might have seen it, but they still want to know what it's about, because it gives them that extra educational piece, what is new within the game. But it's also important for lapsed users to know, because essentially that might be able to bring them back to the game, because that new feature is something that they could resonate with. So when you launch a new feature, always make sure to communicate that to everyone, because it should be something that you're proud of, that you want to make sure that everyone knows of, that there's something new within your game, because why else would you add it? Like you have to shout about it, obviously. And then on top of that, what you could always do, like once you've had that initial approach, like once that feature is there, also look into incorporating it within your onboarding series. So if it's a very key feature, just paint an example for you. With Words with Friends, they introduced this feature that's called clubs. So it's kind of like how you just like join a club with friends, and kind of like a community kind of thing. And then essentially I made sure that we incorporated that in our onboarding series as well, because again, that's a key feature that is there. You want to make sure that new users are aware of what it's about, why it's there, because the thing is, sometimes we make the mistake that we think that people are going to just randomly click on stuff themselves and explore. Yes, they might do that, but still they won't understand why it's there. And you're actually wrong in thinking that people will actually click on it, because there's so many people, because they don't know that it's there, they won't be directed to it. So it's very important as well with your core gameplay and your meta gameplay that you do make sure that you're communicating that to the user as well. And I'm just trying to go, and then essentially as well, what you could also do in terms of your communications, like, okay, this feature has launched, like, let's say 2-3 months ago, you've incorporated in your onboarding series. You can even look into segmentation as well, being like, okay, we've got users that have actively engaged with it, are engaging with it. We'll give them a different approach in communications than we will with users that are not in this feature, are not using this feature. And then you can even set a limit, like, okay, the users that have not used this feature, like, then you have a subsegment that says, like, have they tried this feature before? Yes or no. If they haven't, let's send another communication that explains them about it. If they still don't respond to that, maybe we can reach out one more time, but after that, it's just a done deal. They don't care about the feature. It's no point in communicating them. But then users that have engaged with it before, then you might still reach out to them one more time if they still don't care. So it's really like how you have to change your different tone of voice as well, and how you still want to kind of like push that feature onto users that haven't used it yet before, but obviously do it effectively. Because there's sometimes like users that don't care about the feature, that don't want the messaging. And that is really your thin line as well, that you need to be really accurate with your segmentation. Because, for example, me as a user, if I have looked at it and played it once, but other than that, I don't engage with it anymore, it's fine if you send me a reminder, maybe like once a quarter or something like that. But if after like 3 times I still haven't engaged with it, don't send me weekly communications that I need to log in and play that. Like, that is essentially, if I already say like that is something that would make me uninstall the game, just imagine like how many other people would be like that as well. So that's why your segmentation is very important.
I mean, Shelley, I feel like we will need a follow-up because it's so many. I mean, I'm discovering so many things. I mean, it's insane. Okay, so another question: personalization. Are you for or against it? Is it working or not?
Absolutely. Like, personalization anytime, any day. You can do it from something as simple as just including someone's first name or their username within a push notification or an email. But essentially, even if you do campaigns that's like, let's say you have a game that's about high scores, right? And it's like you track like weekly scores or monthly scores or anything like that, just sending a communication, like, let's say if we focus on a weekly score communication, if you send a push notification like, oh, can you beat your score of last week, and then you enter the parameter of what my weekly high score was last week, obviously that's going to trigger my competitive side being like, let's see if I can beat my last week's high score. So it's like very simple things, from like naming or anything like that, personal score tracking, or even if you are able to track, like, so if you can communicate the highest score by another player, with obviously within data protection and everything, you won't name the name, but if you say like, oh, the highest score this week is this much, without naming the user's name, if you track those kind of data points, those attributes, you can make such powerful communications that will trigger your users to really like go on top of that. Even if it's something like, one of my favorite things to do as well is like monthly stats. So depending on the type of game you have, like, let's say if in the case of a puzzle game, if you would receive a monthly stat that says, okay, Claire, like, for the month of April, you have successfully beat X amount of puzzles. You have, gone so many levels. You have cleared so many yellow stones or something like that. Or you were consistently at this mark on the leaderboard or anything like that. Like, especially leaderboard communications and everything like that. That is because essentially, like, you do have the different personas, obviously. So there again, you would look at the segmentation, like who you would send that to if we're diving into the more competitive communications, because you've got personal stats that someone might be interested in, but you also have a social player, someone that's socially competitive. They might want a tone of voice that's more related, like, oh, you beat five of your friends, whereas the casual strategist that is more focused on their own progression, on their own personalized stats, you have a tone of voice that is just focused towards them. So again, you can like personalization, but also again segmentation based on player personas.
I love it, and I love. I mean, I used to do CRM, but when you speak about it, I'm rediscovering it. Like it's insane. Like your knowledge is crazy, and I think I will invite you again on the podcast.
Honestly, I'd be happy to. I know that sometimes when it comes to CRM, I can just like ramble on because like over the years, it honestly started at Betway where I just like fell more and more in love with data points and could, because I was in a situation that I was running a country like Belgium had regulations, you couldn't do promotion. So I really had to think outside of the box, like what kind of communications could I do, especially in iGaming that still resonate with users, that still makes them come in and play. And I've been lucky enough as well to work with leaders like at the time at Betway, like Sophie and some others like have been so supportive. And I just get really nerdy about thinking of campaign ideas based on data, but also like personalized as well. Like, what would I like to see, or what you see competitors doing? Or even when, like, obviously with CRM, essentially, when you work with a really good third party tool that stays competitive with the capabilities, it's just seeing like, okay, they rolled out this feature, what could I potentially do with it? Because it's not only listening to what the third party, like that tool that you're using says, like, oh, we rolled this out, you could do ABC. But what if you think of like, yeah, but what if I do DEF? It's simple steps like that. It's always thinking outside of the box, like what could be an idea? It's looking at, again, like random trends like baby reindeer or just any ideas, like, because that's the important thing is like, building up ideas, staying competitive is obviously doing good competitor analysis, like keeping track what others are doing, but it's not even using them as trends. It's like even basic things in life, whether it's like if it's a sunny day or anything like that, even communications that is like National Cookie Day or anything like that does a trick. Like one of my favorite campaigns I still did, it was on Words with Friends, where it was Valentine's Day and I sent out a communication that said, if I could rearrange the alphabet, I would put you and I together.
Oh,
And I
love
like,
it.
for Words with Friends, which is a Tile World game, that was just
Oh my, I love it. I love it. I mean, please send me a screenshot. I want to save it. Definitely my favorite notification. Shelley, it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you for giving your time because you're super busy, and I'm sure it was knowledgeable for all our listeners. Do you have a last word, last tips to share?
Oh, well, first of all, like, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully, like, meet you in person again soon. It would be a nice one. It's definitely been good to just ramble about something that I'm passionate about doing. Any tips that I would have is I would say just like stay passionate. Like that is something for me, like because that's how I stay passionate about it, how I am still am. It's like just think wild things, just try. Like obviously you will be met with just like rejections or anything like that, as in like, no, we can't do that, but just keep going because essentially like some of the campaigns that I have done throughout my career, I've been just so proud of because you can essentially be really creative when it comes to CRM. So if you are met with any rejections, just keep going because some of the wild ideas that you have will get out there, and it's just in general, especially a joy when you see that they're working as you hope they would.
Yes, and it's a joy as well, I can say, to listen to you speaking about it and a lot of knowledge for everyone. So please, Sheila, keep sharing. It was amazing to have you on the podcast, puzzling perspective, and thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye. Hop là.
It was Puzzling Perspective, a podcast by Rzain Society. If you like it, I would really appreciate that you give it a like and you subscribe. Please share it to your friend It means a lot and see you soon in Rzain Society.